Welcome to the Chapter 9, Module 3 on Energy Resources, Conventional Sources. So today we'll look at the non-renewable resources of energy that humans use, and in class we'll look at the renewable resources regarding energy. So the first and main question that we have is how can we in fact manage to produce energy from non-renewable resources in a way that reduce as much as possible the environmental impact. And you see from that figure, in fact, that fossil fuel and nuclear energy tend to provide to the humanity most of its energy, even though nuclear tend to be decreasing and renewable energy resources tend to increase little by little. And we'll talk about this at the end of this lecture. So to go over this course today, we'll develop 4 major points. The first one, energy dependence, looks at quickly how a society depends on non-renewable energy, also called conventional energy. That will be a very short part. The second part, being the longest of this class today, will be on energy sources, looking at what are the non-renewable energy resources that our society depends so much on. A third part will look quickly on the environmental impacts induced by the extraction, the production, and emission of substance from these non-renewable energy resources. And the last point is on mitigation tactics, which we will look at how humans tend to reduce the possible environmental impacts from this energy dependence, finishing up with an opening to the next class that will come right after this one. Okay, so let's start with the first point, which is looking at briefly how our society use non-renewable energy. And first, over time, what we can see is that since the Industrial Revolution, at the beginning of the 19th century, we have been depending a lot on conventional energy. In fact, the Industrial Revolution was made possible by the burning of mostly wood at that time, turning then after to what we can see coal about 50 years after, by the end of the 19th centuries. And coal has been used over and over with an increase even over the recent years. And by the beginning of the 20th century, another major source of energy, of conventional energy, has shown up and increased, still leading at this point most of our production of energy. It's oil, followed by natural gas. What you can also see is at the bottom part is a blue source, which refers to biofuels. In fact, this biofuels is wood burning, and it has been more or less consistent over the last 200 years. And this, what we can also see is that in general our consumption has exploded pretty much parallelly to the growth of human population. That's just more people on the planet, more need of energy, and so the production of energy has followed pretty much the human population growth. At that point, if we look at this graph, we can see that a major portion of our energy is made from conventional energy or non-renewable energy. It's in fact about 87% of all the energy being produced that is made up from non-renewable energy resources. Only a small portion on this graph is shown to be in light blue, made up by hydroelectricity, and some of the nuclear, which is also considered non-renewable energy. If we look at this energy consumption, not on a global point of view, but by person, what we can see is that over time, in fact, the wood consumption has decreased for the production of energy, which is totally at the contrary for the coal, also for oil and natural gas. The 3 ones called fossil fuel, we'll see that in a bit, have been increasing, meaning that in fact people in general tend to consume more energy from fossil fuel, and they have been consuming more with time. And about the same amount is being consumed for hydroelectricity and nuclear at this point. And so the question is, how can we provide enough energy that will supply this demand without being major environmental impacts? So we'll be looking at that at the end of this course. If we look at which countries are mostly consuming energy, what we can figure out is, well, not a big surprise, but United States and the European Union has been the leader in terms of energy consumption over the past years. Since, in fact, the beginning of 2000, China, because of its increase of population and development, has in fact taken the lead on energy consumption. And only those three countries or three economies represent about half of the consumption of the energy produced in the world, about 53%. And if we look by people, Americans are the one consuming the most energy from conventional resources, with about twice as much as people from Europe and almost 3 times as much as from China. So that's kind of posing again the same question about overconsumption regarding the US at this point. If everyone was acting like the US, we would definitely have a crisis issue. How do we use our energy in the US? Well, we use it for electricity, we use it for, as you can see right here, we use it for transportation, for our industries, and then after for what we call residential and commercial, so mostly cities. What kind of energy are we using for each of those sectors depends. And so we can see from this graph that, for example, let's start with petroleum. Petroleum is in majority used by almost 3/4, 75%, for transportation and also for industrial sites, so for the combustion linked for industrial activity. Mostly that's those two ones. Natural gas, if we look, is mostly used for industry, residential. We use gas, for example, for some houses with oven, for example, or dryers and other appliances, and also used to produce electricity by about 1/3. In the US, the majority of the electricity is made up from coal. About 90% of coal is used to produce electricity. So when we think about electricity as a clean energy, we have to be careful about its source. Finally, renewable energy, about 50% is used for electrical power, with a little bit used for industrial and slightly an increase regarding transportation. Nuclear energy is entirely used for the production of electricity. So major thing to remember: coal, about 90% used to generate electricity. Petroleum used mostly for transportation and a bit for industry. And natural gas, mostly transportation, industry, electricity. We can see how the sources change regarding the states you're in. Looking at this map, what we can see is different color based on the resources of energy. For example, California, a lot of energy is made up from solar energy, from hydroelectricity also, and a bit from biomass. Coming from methane, for example, being released in landfill, and waste that is converted, that is used to produce electricity. What we can also see is that in California we have a few nuclear sites, but in general the nuclear power plants tend to be not as many in the west side. They tend to be much more localized in the east side. We have some geothermal energy around the Sierra Nevada that we can find here, and on the east side the majority of the electricity is made up from biomass, again from waste and gas escaping landfills, and the majority is made up from natural gas burning and coal burning. If we look into more details, what we can see is some states in the Midwest of the US tend to be the most energy productive, with states from New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, North Dakota down to Texas producing about 45-46% of the energy of the US. If we look at the resources, this energy is mainly produced by natural gas at 67%, followed by wind resource energy by 51%, coal is used at 43%, and oil 39% of energy. So that's this data regarding those states in the Midwest of the US. Other important data to look at is this graph that shows that the consumption in the US of energy has been increasing over time, with the majority of this energy being produced by fossil fuel, 82% in this chart being produced by fossil fuel, and a slight increase of renewable energy over time, but very, very light. Nuclear energy tends to have been pretty stable over the last years. But the US tend to consume more than it can, in fact, it can produce. And we have, from this graph, a pretty good view that production tends to be lower than consumption. That's something to work on. And so as a consequence, there is an importation of energy inside of the US, and exportation tend to be reduced, even though we can see that over the last years, importation of energy tend to have decreased versus for the benefit of exportation. Okay, so that will be it for the first part. I'm stopping the video right here, and whenever you're ready, just start the second video, in which we will talk about the different kind of conventional energy, their sources, their formation, and their extraction. See you in a bit.